VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morris, and welcome to Crosstalk. Today we're going to be talking about identity protection. If you ever listen to radio or satellite radio, you hear them talking about having identity theft problems and how you can protect yourself by signing up with some of these organizations. Well, for years, on my credit card, I've always marked where it says sign the credit card. I put this ask for PIX ID. And sometimes they spot it, sometimes they don't. And when they don't, I pull out my ID set. Before you transact, I want you to make sure you're transacting with the right guy. It wasn't but about close to a year ago, I stopped by. It was late one evening, and stopped by for some carry-out Chinese food at a little restaurant on 68th and State Street, a little strip mall there. And I gave him my card to pay for the Chinese, whatever it was. And the next morning, I get a phone call from Visa. And they said, did you make a payment today for a $500 airplane ticket? And I said, no, I didn't. Well, they said, we kind of thought that wasn't accurate. And the perpetrators had charged $1 twice. When it worked, they went ahead and charged a $500 airplane ticket. Who knows? I think they're going back to China or something. But at any rate, the issue of ID, and I always put on my credit cards, ask for PIX ID. Because guess what? It has to do with my money. And I hope you do the same. Many people do the same thing. But this business of identification, when it comes to voting, anybody, there have been dead people who have been voting for years in Chicago. There are good reasons to have identification. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that it's good to have Big Brother looking over our shoulder constantly, but there are legitimate areas where we need to be sure that who is who and not somebody else. As I said, there have been more people from the grave voting over decades, as Chicago-style politics has often generated those events. Well, today we've got an interesting program. Our guest, he's got one of those Swedish names that are a little bit difficult to pronounce, Hans von Spakovsky. Did I say it right, Hans?
Vic, you didn't have any problems.
Hey, well, is it Swede? Now, what nationality is that, Spakovsky?
Actually, my father was Russian, my mother's German.
Well, I'm so glad that you're with us, and I'm glad I didn't butcher your name.
Well, thanks.
But Hans is with us today. He is a contributor to PJ Media and a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Institute. And it seems wherever we go today, ID is needed, and rightly so in many cases. We need ID to fly. We needed to check out library books. We needed to buy certain sinus medications over the counter. We even needed to get rid of trash at the city's recycle yard. And yet, for one to say that you need ID to protect the integrity of your vote, people begin screaming and jumping up and down over the issue. Hans, how many states have some form of voter ID laws?
Well, about half the states have some form of voter ID laws. The states that actually require a government-issued photo ID is going on 8 states, although some other states are in the process of trying to pass a stricter version.
Mm-hmm. Well, has this just been a sudden surge, or is it something that has just picked up over recent years?
Well, it's picked up over recent years. Georgia and Indiana actually passed their laws back in 2005, and that's actually quite a while ago. But it picked up steam after 2010 when, in addition to the huge change we had in Congress, a lot of people don't realize there was also a huge change, historical change, in state legislatures all over the country. And that's where these laws are being passed, is in the states.
And why is it that the states are finding it necessary to enact this kind of a law?
Well, a lot of folks, including me, have been recommending to states that they do this because it's a basic security measure to require somebody when they go in to vote to authenticate that they really are who they say they are. And while opponents will say, well, the only thing this does is prevent impersonation fraud, and that almost never happens, there are actually proven cases of impersonation fraud. And, look, a photo ID can prevent a whole host of other things. For example, it prevents people from voting under fictitious voter registrations. And all you have to do is look at the many, many prosecutions of Acorn and Acorn employees to know that there is a problem with false registrations. The other thing it can prevent is people who are in the United States illegally from registering and voting elections. And we have problems with that, too, in many different parts of the country.
Well, you know, this issue of voting right here in the state of Wisconsin, of course, we've got this big recall thing with Governor Walker. And the issue there of knowing who it is that even signed the recall petitions. And they had people signing the recall petitions like Adolf Hitler, Mickey the Mouse, and on it goes. The issue of integrity seems to be very much in need right now.
Oh, sure, and I think it was an organization called Media Trackers, that turned up that several people who work for the SEIU union who are not residents of Wisconsin in the recall elections last year, the ones that were directed at members of the state legislature, 3 SEIU activists from out of state registered at a local motel and voted in the election.
Well, and there's one house, I think there were 35 people that all gave that same address.
Right.
Here in the city. Well, folks, as we're talking about this, Hans, the United States Attorney General has been vigorously fighting voter ID laws, saying that they're unnecessary, discriminatory, and making it harder for minorities to vote. Is there any truth in what he's saying?
No, there's no truth in that whatsoever. Look, in 2005, when Georgia passed its photo ID law, they actually had submitted that law to the Justice Department for what's called pre-clearance. Georgia is one of the small number of states in the country that, under a particular provision of the Voting Rights Act, they can't make a change in their voting law without first getting it approved by the Justice Department and showing that it's not discriminatory. At that time, the Justice Department was under the control of the Bush administration, and they pre-cleared the law because they found that it was not discriminatory. Many people in the civil rights community criticized that decision, but it turned out to be correct. How do we know? Well, the NAACP and others actually filed a federal lawsuit against the Georgia law after the Bush administration cleared the law. They claimed it was discriminatory under the Voting Rights Act. Their lawsuit was thrown out of court by a federal judge because they couldn't provide a single person, not one witness, who would be unable to vote because of the law. And the turnout of African Americans, Hispanics, has gone up dramatically in Georgia in federal elections held since the law went into effect.
Now, on states that have enacted the voter ID laws, is the minority vote being suppressed?
No, it's not at all. We know that minority voters do not have a problem voting in states with voter ID laws. We know that from what's happened in the polling places in states that have had photo ID. I just talked about Georgia, Indiana, very same experience. Their law has been in effect also since 2006. Turnout of African Americans has gone up, and look, that's the reason why the federal lawsuit against Indiana's photo ID law, which claimed that it was discriminatory, that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court upheld the law, said it was perfectly constitutional.
Now, beside the U.S. Justice Department, there are a number of groups such as the Center for American Progress, the Advancement Project, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. What are their objections to voter ID?
Well, they all have claimed that this is a reimposition of Jim Crow. They claim it's discriminatory, that it will suppress the vote. So Pajamas Media, PJ Media now, where I'm a contributor, well, we decided we would go visit the offices of those organizations that claim that photo ID is a discriminatory requirement. And guess what? If you want to get into the Washington offices of all of those civil rights organizations and the Center for American Progress, which is a liberal think tank, you can't get in without a government-issued photo ID.
Talk about hypocrisy.
Well, yeah, and by the way, the same thing is true at the U.S. Department of Justice that Eric Holder heads. If you want to get into the main Justice headquarters building in Washington, where Eric Holder has his office, you can't even get in the front door without a government-issued photo ID. They have guards outside on the sidewalk, and you have to show them a photo ID just to get past them and get into the lobby, where you have to show the photo ID a second time.
Mm. Do you know how these organizations that we mentioned, how they're funded?
Well, they're funded by their membership, and the way they get funding from their membership is to send them scary letters claiming things like that their vote's being suppressed and please send us money to help us fight this. So, they have a temptation I think they can't resist to exaggerate this problem and to make up and basically fabricate all of these claims that this is an intent to discriminate and keep, for example, African Americans out of the polls. It's not that at all. It's just a basic safety measure, and the American people overwhelmingly support it, including Hispanics and African Americans and others.
Now, Hans, we're going to be taking a break in about a minute. But I know you have some websites and some vital information that our listeners can access through the Internet or books you've published on the topic. Tell us what's out there.
Sure. I've actually done a number of papers for the Heritage Foundation that show all the statistics that we know of about how voter ID does not hurt turnout. You can find those at the heritage.org website under my name. If you plug in Hans, H-A-N-S, I'm the only Hans at the Heritage Foundation. But also, if you go to pjmedia.com, on their front web page, they've got the undercover video that we did where we went to the offices of these civil rights organizations and the Justice Department to show that while they may complain about voter ID, that doesn't prevent them from requiring it from anybody who wants to talk to them.
When we come back, we're going to be talking about this very thing, about your hidden cameras visiting each of 3 organizations, and you'll be telling us about those events. But folks, talk about hypocrisy. Talk about saying, well, you don't need voter ID. You're voting for your national. I mean, these are our leaders of tomorrow. These are the people that will make choices that will keep us out of war or declare what is needed to be done. But here we sit like toads in a hailstorm, blinking our eyes as this kind of stuff goes on. Hypocrisy? Yeah, I believe it. We're going to take a break and be right back with our guest today, talking more about this issue of identification and voter ID. We shall return. This is Crosstalk on VCY.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist and scientist at the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, are there any fossils found in the Amazon rainforest?
Chris, the Amazon rainforest is so wet and hot that when something dies, it decays so quickly that most evolutionists have thought it would be a waste of time to look for fossils there because they wouldn't last. Imagine their surprise when a fossil deposit, including a 32-foot-long dinosaur, was found along with fossil turtles and crocodiles and mollusks and fish, all precisely preserved. I think this is proof positive that deposition was rapid, and these things were buried quickly away from bacteria and away from the elements so they could be preserved. That kind of thing would happen in a big flood, and Just that kind of flood is mentioned back in Genesis.
If you want to know more about the creation-evolution issue, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. Back to Genesis is a production of the Institute for Creation Research. I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, where today we're talking with Hans von Spakovsky. And he is a contributor to PJ Media, a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Institute. We're talking about the need for voter ID. Now, frankly, I wouldn't mind at all pulling out my driver's license and showing it. In fact, I offered to at the recent local and regional elections here. I pulled it out, and the lady almost was embarrassed. Oh, no, you don't need that. Well, I'd be happy if they did use it. But at least I know that I'm not voting, or some dead body is voting for me. It's so important there. But let's go to the drama of what you guys did, Hans. You traveled with a hidden camera and visited several organizations. Tell us some details about those experiences.
Sure. Well, we spent a morning walking around downtown Washington, D.C., because, of course, all these civil rights organizations have offices there, and we would walk into the lobbies of these buildings. One of them, for example, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, which has been very vocal in its opposition to voter ID laws. They have actually a sign in their lobby that says you need a government-issued photo ID, and we were able to get the video because we were using the benefits of modern technology. I had one of those pen phones. It looks just like a regular pen, but it's actually
camera?
A camera.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a camera, and I just had that in the pocket of my coat, and we also had what they call a buttonhole camera. It's just a little rectangular box that's a video camera, and it has a button on one end, and you button that on your shirt, and no one can tell you've got a camera on.
And you have certainly every right to ask those questions. I think I even saw, didn't you guys do something up in Minneapolis, too? Or was it another group?
No, that was James O'Keefe.
That was right. They were looking for those absentee ballot things.
That's right. And this week, James O'Keefe, he sent his folks undercover in Washington, D.C. They just had a primary in Washington, D.C., and he sent one of his guys in to the polling place where Eric Holder, the Attorney General, is both registered to vote, and the guy went in and asked for Eric Holder's ballot, and the undercover guy, he's white, he's not black, but the local poll official said, Eric Holder, oh yeah, here's the ballot, and he was willing to hand the undercover guy Eric Holder's ballot. Now, he didn't take it, of course, he walked out of the polling place, but that shows how easy it is when you don't require photo ID to get somebody else's ballot. And what hasn't been mentioned in any of these stories, Vic, is that when Vincent Gray, the current mayor of Washington, D.C., came in, the woman that he appointed as his deputy chief of staff had to resign because a community activist discovered that she had registered and voted in the District of Columbia, even though she's a resident of Maryland.
Oh, brother. Well, it is hypocritical for these organizations who claim voter ID is unfair, and then they demand it just to get in their doors. Now, we understand in response to this that the District of Columbia Board of Elections are not trying to shore up their system. Rather, they are launching an investigation to possibly bring charges against the group that was conducting the undercover investigation. Is that you guys?
No, they're doing that on James O'Keefe, the guy who sent someone into the ballot to get asked for Eric Holder's ballot. But that is typical, unfortunately, of the reaction of elections. They want to shoot the messenger rather than try to firm up their security and make sure this doesn't happen. Keep in mind, this is the same election board in the District of Columbia that about 2 years ago they announced that they had this wonderful Internet voting project. They were going to set up this whole system to allow people in the District of Columbia to vote through the Internet, and they challenged any hackers to try to get into their system because they said it was absolutely secure. A computer professor at the University, I think, of Michigan assigned this to his class. Within 24 hours, they had been able to successfully hack into the District of Columbia's new Internet voting site. And I think they set it up so that every time somebody voted, it ended up playing the Michigan fight song. That was the end of their Internet voting project.
That is amazing. Well, if I understand correctly, we're being told that such videos, more of them, are going to be coming forth. Is it your opinion that these types of reports just add more fuel to the fire, that voter ID is necessary?
Yes, I think James O'Keefe is doing a great service to the country, laying to rest these really silly claims that we don't need this. We need photo ID in so many different places today, and the idea that we would not want that kind of basic security in the voting place is just silly. And it's particularly ironic and hypocritical for the Attorney General to be protesting this because, as you probably know, the federal government requires employers all over the country. If you want to get a job, you can't get a job until you authenticate your identity and your citizenship with your employers. Anybody who's gotten a job knows they have to fill out what's called the I-9 form.
That's right. I just processed one of those just yesterday.
Yes, and so here the federal government is applying these kind of ID requirements. They also have the same kind of ID requirements if you want to apply for things like food stamps.
Well, and it's not just the photo ID, but also your social. You have to have two forms of ID before you can even hire them.
Yes, and you have to prove your citizenship. That's an additional step, beyond just showing your ID in the polling place. I mean, the idea that we should not do this for voting because it's such a precious right. Well, actually, I think we should be more careful in protecting such a precious right.
Why has voter ID become such a partisan issue?
Well, I tell you, I think it's a sad reflection of the leadership, unfortunately, of the Democratic Party. Now, I should say, this is not uniformly true. I mean, for example, Rhode Island, is one of the states that passed a photo ID requirement. That's a state that's controlled by Democrats 4-1. And in fact, on the state Senate side, the bill there was sponsored by an African-American Democrat, a man named Harold Metz, and he took a lot of heat for this, but he said, look, voter fraud is real. We need this. He has seen fraud there, and the idea. I mean, he found the idea that, for example, Black Americans would not be able to get ID or show ID. He found that to be a patronizing attitude, and he did not like that, and he's written that in several opinion pieces that he's had published in Rhode Island newspapers.
Well, I see, and I'm talking about people of other different ethnic backgrounds, but all of them drive cars, or most of them. If you drive a car, you got to have a driver's license, and if you want one of those, you smile into the little blue box, and your picture shows up on your DL.
Well, yeah, and no, in fact, listen, on that very issue, I recently published a paper that is available at the Heritage website where I took a look at the state of Georgia, because Georgia, just like every other state that has put in a photo ID requirement, they will provide a free photo ID to anybody who doesn't have one. Well, there are 6 million voters in the state of Georgia, and so many of them already have photo ID, driver's licenses, that in a 6-year period, they've only issued a little over 25,000 free IDs.
Oh, my.
So only that. What does that mean? It means a couple of thousand every year to people who don't already have an ID. That shows you how ridiculous the claims are that 25% of Americans or African Americans don't have photo ID.
Well, Wisconsin passed voter ID this past year, and all it took was one liberal judge to block it. And now it's in the hands of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The case is brought by the League of Women Voters. Isn't this to be a group that's concerned for the integrity of the vote, League of Women Voters?
No, unfortunately, the League of Women Voters long ago quit being a nonpartisan organization. They have been involved in trying to stop photo ID all over the country. And in fact, when the Indiana lawsuit ended up before the U.S. Supreme Court, they filed an amicus brief in that case trying to convince the justices to rule against it, actually to their embarrassment, because they named a particular Indiana voter in the brief they filed in the Supreme Court, saying that this elderly voter had problems voting because of the photo ID law, and she was a great example of why they should toss out the law. Well, a local newspaper in Indiana decided to go interview that voter and find out why she'd had trouble voting. Well, it turned out when she showed up at her Indiana polling place, she pulled out not a Indiana driver's license, she pulled out a Florida driver's license to try to vote. Turned out that she owned a second home in Florida and was registered to vote in Florida.
Well, now the Attorney General is amassing an aggressive campaign to fight against states who have already enacted voter ID laws. And I guess the big question is, what can people across this nation do about it?
Well, Texas and South Carolina, where he has objected to their photo ID laws, they have already gone to court in the District of Columbia here in Washington to fight that. I think the best thing people can do in their states is try to convince their state legislators to put in photo ID requirements as just a very basic measure of making sure we have fair and impartial elections. And frankly, I'd go a step further. I mean, the next step beyond photo ID is to put in a requirement that when you register to vote, you have to provide proof that you're a U.S. citizen. That's something that so far only 3 states have done, Arizona, Georgia, and Kansas. But frankly, that's the next step that we need to take to secure our elections.
Well, and also on the other side of the ballot, those people that are vetting those candidates for president are wanting to make sure that they're qualified to be president. Bring back any memories?
It does, but see, that's something that state legislators can easily take care of. Because, look, states, we have a decentralized voting system. If you want to run for president, how do you do it? Well, you have to get qualified to be on the ballot in the 50 states. And that means that state legislators, they're the ones that set out the requirements. They're the ones that say how much of a fee you have to pay to qualify, what paperwork you have to file, and it would be very easy for them to say that, okay, you have to provide us proof that you meet all of the qualifications that are set out in the Constitution to be president.
We're going to be taking a break in about 60 seconds here, and we're going to open our phone lines and find out what you people across the country think about this voter ID thing. Are you for it? Do you have some problems with it? Let's find out or talk about it. And our guest, Hans, is going to be with us. We'll be talking about your opportunity to share your thoughts on whether or not voter ID is something you think would be a good idea. Frankly, in my opinion, I think it is. I'd like to know that I'm not, sitting there and having some dead person take my voting rights by simply putting a name on a piece of paper that doesn't exist. Boy, that thing with Eric Holder and his ballot could have really, really been, and of course then you bring action against these people that tried it simply to defame them and attack the messenger. We're going to be back in just a few moments, but the program is called Crosstalk. If you're listening for the first time today, we welcome you. We have listeners all across the world, literally on the internet as well. But right now we're going to take a break and be back. Our phone lines are open if you'd like to call with your comments on it. 800-733-9829. Do you think it's a good idea? Have you maybe observed strange things happening in your voting precinct where some phonies were in there signing up to vote? We'd like to hear from you. 800-733-9829. This is Crosstalk. We'll be right back.
Many churches are abandoning the old hymns of the faith. Yet these very hymns are a rich treasure trove of biblical truth, and unless we pass them on to the next generation, they will be lost. In the book, Then Sings My Soul, Volume 3, author Robert Morgan provides more than 50 devotional-style stories about hymns through the ages. You'll learn the stories and backgrounds to the hymns that have blessed us, including It Is Well With My Soul, In Times Like These, How Great Thou Art, The Old Rugged Cross, and many more. The book also includes the music for each of the hymns, spanning over many decades. It's ideal for family devotions and for personal enrichment. To obtain your copy of Then Sings My Soul, Volume 3, send a donation of $23 or more to VCY America, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. To make your donation by phone, call 1-800-729-9829. 1-800-729-9829.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, where today we're talking about voter ID hypocrisy. I mean, you can't even get into the agencies without showing ID. These agencies are the ones that are fighting the ID for voters. Something rather strange. Well, our guest today, Hans von Spakovsky, is with us. He represents PJ Media, also senior legal fellow at the Heritage Institute. And we're talking about the issue of whether or not you think voter ID is a good thing, or if you don't, you're welcome to disagree as well. Right now we're going to go out on the road in Kansas, and we're going to talk with John, who is on the line. And John, welcome to Crosstalk.
Hi, how you doing?
Just fine, sir.
Well, I'm a truck driver, and recently in this last election lost my right to vote because I didn't vote because I wasn't in my state. So if a voter ID on one aspect would be good, if I could use it in whichever state I'm in, which I'm assuming doesn't happen.
Well, Hans, your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure why John is saying he lost his right to vote. He has to have a residence somewhere, and wherever you reside, that's where, under every state's law, you're supposed to vote. You have to be a resident of a state to vote. And if you're not in town on Election Day, I mean, every single state, if you're not there because of your work commitments, you can vote by absentee ballot. And there's a lot of states now where you can do what's called early voting. You know, they have a period anywhere from a week to 3 weeks before the election where you can go in and vote. So there's really no reason for him not to be able to vote in his home state.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Excellent, thank you.
Sure. You bet. Thanks so much, John, on the road there in Kansas. Oh, these 18-wheel drivers, big job. Let's go to Port Charlotte, Florida, and we'll talk to Vincent. Vincent, welcome to the program. Our telephone number, 800-733-9829. Got 2 vacant lines if you want to call, folks. Vincent, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you. I just want to make 2 quick comments. The first one is something as basic as a voter ID. The Democratic Party is fighting against that, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Because, we need that for just basic ID with terrorism and all these things. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, this is kind of off the topic, but whenever you come into any major city, the black neighborhood is pretty much well defined by, the things. And we wonder why I'm black. Why are we put down? Why is the black man still struggling the way he is? It's because the Democratic Party, liberalism, is holding us back with basic things like a voter ID. We shouldn't be complaining about that one bit. We should just go out, get our ID, and you don't have to have a driver's license. A basic ID is fine, and then go and vote. And that's my 2 comments. Thank you very much.
Vincent, thank you from Port Charlotte, Florida. Appreciate that very much. We're going to move right along. We have Barbara, who's in Ohio. And Barbara, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for your show.
Mm-hmm.
I was just calling to comment. I live in Ohio, and we have to show our photo ID to vote, and there is no problem with that at all. And I don't care if you go down there to vote, if there is a family member sitting there at the poll, you still give your photo ID whether they know you or not.
Mm.
And the only reason to me that someone would have to not want photo ID is if things are not going to be done legitimately.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that everyone should have to show a photo ID, and if they go on to require that we have to show our citizenship, that's fine with me.
In other countries where Barbara, people carry papers like a passport.
Yes.
And identification. At least we can go from Missouri to Wisconsin or without carrying a passport just to make the passage.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate that.
Thank you for your show.
Hey, God bless you now.
You too. Bye.
Moving along, the lines are filling up here. Get your calls in. One vacant line right now. Jefferson, Wisconsin. And Jeff, you are on the air.
Hi. I got 2 quick points. Well, my first point is what a woefully inadequate job our education system is doing of teaching American citizens how we vote, our system of voting, even in, locally, what's required of each citizen, the most important duty that we have in this country. My second point is where else in life can you get along without an ID? Is there anything that you can do without an ID? How do you survive to even make it to the polling place without an ID?
And I'm not an advocate of smoking, but if you go to these places, you're carded. Even if you look a young adult, carding or identifying who you are and how old you are, with a filthy habit like smoking. But that's out there just in order to partake in that type of an unsavory habit.
Yeah, well, there's many other things too, Vic. And the thing is, to not have an ID, I mean, you've almost got to make a conscious effort to keep yourself, I'd say, off the grid in order to not have an ID.
Let's go to Ralph, who is in New Jersey. And Ralph, you're on the air. Go right ahead.
I have a suggestion to make. Whenever someone asks us for an ID to cash a check or get on a plane or whatever, we say, that's demeaning, that's restrictive, that's regressive. That represents a step backwards in a decades-long struggle to end discrimination. I mean, that's what they say we shouldn't have a voter ID for, so maybe we could give the same excuse.
Yeah, no, I think you would. Unfortunately, if you did that, you wouldn't get on the airplane. You wouldn't be able to get on Amtrak. You won't be able to do a million other things. And
they'll give us that answer and then say, "But we can vote."
Well, you guys, if you want to rent a car and you have a roll of $50 or $100 or $500 bills in your pocket, and walk up, put them on the counter, and say, "I want to rent a car," they won't do it unless you have a credit card, which technically is an identification.
Yeah. Now, let me say something about this, and that is what Holder has said and others, and I think it's incorrect, is that, well, all these other things you need ID for, those are not constitutional rights. Well, in fact, on many of these, he's wrong. I mean, for example, under the First Amendment, each American has the constitutional right to petition the government for redress of grievances. That's the term for what we call lobbying today, lobbying the government. Well, if you want to get into the Justice Department or other federal buildings in order to talk to government officials about particular issues or bills, things like that, you can't do it without a photo ID. So to exercise that constitutional right, the government itself, the federal government, is imposing an ID requirement on you.
Jackson, Tennessee, and our guest, Carol. Carol, you're on the air.
Yes. I'm a senior citizen, and I don't drive. I had to pay someone to take me to the driver's place to get a photo ID. It was no problem. It was $10. I had to bring all my identification, my birth certificate, and all that good stuff. And I got my photo ID, and I need it for so many things, and I have no problem showing it when I vote because I'm a legal citizen, and I'm proud of it.
And you are who you say you are, Carol.
Oh, you better believe it.
Thank you, Carol. From Jackson, Tennessee. We're going to move to Jan in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Our telephone number 800-733-9829. Hi, Jan. How are you?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that in Wisconsin, we didn't have to, here in Milwaukee, we didn't have to pay anything to get our photo ID. We got it free. Otherwise, we had to pay like $30. And so I don't see, what the problem was there. And the other thing I wanted to bring up was that during the time when they were recalling Governor Walker, I had overheard a different one saying, well, I signed, I don't know how many times,
Oh, brother.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think a photo ID is the best thing that we ever had.
Well, of course, if your name was Adolf Hitler or Mickey Mouse and you signed, I mean, whoever's passing that petition around also has got some accountability. I mean, taking that and then turning it in.
Right.
Turning it in ought to be a crime.
Yes.
Thanks, Jan. Appreciate the call. Moving right along, calls from everywhere here. Let's go to Art in Illinois. And Art, how are you?
Hello?
You're on the air.
Okay, I have a comment to make. I've thought of it for some time, but the photo ID was a good idea. And my conclusion has come that the reason that people don't want to have the photo ID is because they get tired of digging people up and making the pictures look presentable to like they're alive.
Oh my, yeah, proving that that there is life after death, huh?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate that from Illinois, Mobile, Alabama, and talk with Earl. Earl, you're on the air.
Hey, yeah. How you doing today?
Fine, sir.
Look, I need to ask y'all a question. It's about voting, but a long time ago when I was 19, I got in a little trouble. And, you know, the feds got involved in it, but they dropped the case against me. The state picked it up. But every time I go down there and want to vote, they said I can't vote because I had a felony against me. And they still hold that against me, and that's been over 40 years ago.
Have you gone to the Department of Justice within your state?
Yes, sir, I sure have. And they said they can't do nothing about it. He said the Fed is holding this open for some reason.
It's a federal issue then.
Right, well, it shouldn't have been because in the courtroom, the judge, the Fed says we dropped the charges against them. Mm-hmm. And then my company that I work for says, well, we want the state to pick it up. So the state picked it up, and the judge didn't lock me up because he says that boy ain't never done nothing. The first time he ever done anything wrong. He said I give him a 3-year probation, and that's it. And I did my 3-year probation, but I still can't vote. I can't even get a place to rent.
Suggestion there, Hans.
Well, what state are you in?
Mobile, Alabama.
Okay, well, Alabama, in Alabama, once you've been convicted of a felony, and the fact that you got probation, and you know, how you were sentenced isn't the issue. The issue in Alabama, as in most states, is that once you're convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote. Now, in many states, you can get your right to vote back once you have finished your sentence and terms of probation, all that. Alabama is, however, one of the states where you've got to send an application there's a pardons and parole board in Alabama. And what you need to do is you can go to their website, you can call them up and find out what you have to do in order to get your voting right restored. And probably what you'll have to do is simply send a letter to the state pardons and parole board, explain your circumstances, and ask them to restore your right to vote.
Yes, I have a friend that's in the military and in the Coast Guard. He's kind of big up in the Coast Guard there, but he got his attorney, and his attorney can't do anything with it.
Well, you've got to make an application to the pardon and parole board.
We made the application. They sent it in, and they turned it back. It fused in me.
Well, my friend, I can't. If we don't know all the details, but I would suggest get you a good attorney. And if they're dealing with something, again, some of this bureaucracy mess gets all snarled up, and just to get it changed. But I wouldn't stop trying.
No, I hadn't stopped. He filed it again and see what they're going to do. I mean, he's got one of the best attorneys in Mobile for me, so
well,
he's trying his best.
Earl, thanks for the call. Have a great day.
How you doing?
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewweekend.com. Continuing on our list of 20 characteristics of false teachers embraced by the false church. Number 3, false teachers openly reject truth. 2 Timothy 4:4 says, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. Isn't it interesting that the Bible tells us that many of the false teachers and those that follow them deliberately turn their ear away from hearing the truth? I think this goes right along with 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 through 11, where we read, during the tribulation, God will give them over to this powerful delusion, so they will believe the lie. Why is God going to do this? Because it says in 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 through 11, they refuse to love the truth and be saved. In other words, they've turned their ear away from truth. So false teachers openly reject truth. I'm Brandon House for the Worldview Weekend Minute. You can visit our website at worldviewweekend.com.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. Coming down the home stretch here, our final segment. We have 2 more phone calls right now. We're talking about voter ID, and our guest today is Hans von Spakovsky. He is a contributor to PJ Media. He's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Institute. And before we take the calls, Hans, would you give a website or web place where people can get more information?
Sure. They can get it at PJ Media, and they can also get it at heritage.org.
PJ Media, is it .com?
It is pjmedia.com.
.com. And
heritage.org.
Okay, just the word heritage.
Just the word heritage.
Okay, well, let's go now to Racine, Wisconsin, and we're going to talk with Michael. And Michael, you were on the air. Mike, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon.
Yes, sir.
Interesting comment. When you were talking about credit cards and having to sign the back of them, I went into a post office and presented my credit card, and I have that CID on the back of it.
Oh, yeah?
They will not allow a credit card that's not signed to be used. So I had my hands full, so I signed it off and later went back and erased it. But it's just interesting from how you started the show. But one of the things about a photo ID, I'm an advocate for that because I think it will lessen voter fraud in person. But you still have the issue of absentee ballots and overseas ballots. Things like that are still going to be hard to stop. Just a thought.
Well, I guess honesty and integrity is also an element. The less we have of it in our country, the more hazards erupt.
Right, but look, he's got a good point about absentee ballots, because unfortunately that is another way that people steal election through fraudulent absentee ballots. But there are things you can do about that combined with photo ID. In fact, the state of Kansas last year, when it passed its photo ID law, also put in a provision saying that when you request an absentee ballot, that is, as a voter, in addition to your name and address and the usual information you have to provide, you also have to provide either a photocopy of your photo ID or the serial number of your driver's license that you've had issued by the state of Kansas. And that is a good way of making sure that the person requesting the absentee ballot is really the voter.
That's neat. A final call from Lansing, Iowa. And Pastor Hayes, go ahead.
Yes, sir, Vic. I support voter ID. That's mandatory to prevent voter fraud. A recent article in the La Crosse Tribune on the right-hand side at the top had a picture of the second judge that stated that voting is a constitutional right and you should not have to have a voter ID for a constitutional right. Well, if that's true, then why do you have to have a photo ID to buy guns in the states of Iowa and Wisconsin? That's actually a constitutional law that's protected by the Second Amendment. So if you don't have to have a voter ID to vote, then why in the world do you have to have a voter ID in order to buy guns? When I went to La Crosse to buy a long gun a year ago, even though I live in Iowa, I had to have a photo ID to buy the long gun that I bought. I'm a strong supporter of citizens having the right to keep and bear arms. So the judge that was trying to say that since voting is a civil right, so therefore you should not have to have a photo ID, that doesn't ring true if you have to have a photo ID to buy guns.
Pastor Hayes, I thank you. Thank you so much for those thoughts. And I want to say thank you, Hans, for being with us. You've been a very, very wonderful guest.
Well, thank you. And, hey, that was a great way to end the session because he's absolutely right.
Absolutely. Well, again, heritage.org or pjmedia.com.
That's right.
Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, we have just time enough for one interesting side story that came to me, and I couldn't resist. We're changing directions for this moment, and this was an interesting one. Judicial Watch, who appears on this program quite often, uncovers new documents. Now, this, of course, dates back, well, it was printed, of course, now, but it dates back to October the 14th, 2010. It obtained new documents from the United States Air Force detailing House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's repeated use of United States Air Force aircraft. And some of the interesting things, I thought, along with trying to cut government spending and all these things that are facing us today, that Ms. Pelosi used Air Force aircraft a total of 85 trips, covering 206,000 miles from March the 2nd, 2009, through June the 7th, 2010. Ms. Pelosi, her guests, and Air Force personnel logged a total of 428.6 hours on those flights. Members of the Pelosi family were guests on at least 2 flights. On June 30th, 2009, Speaker Pelosi's daughter, son-in-law, and 2 grandsons joined a flight from Andrews Air Force Base to San Francisco International Airport, and the flights included $143 in on-flight expenses for food. That's on an Air Force plane. On July the 2nd, 2010, Pelosi took her grandson on a flight from Andrews Air Force Base to Travis Air Force Base in Fairfield, California. Interesting, which, by the way, is northeast of San Francisco. According to the previous documents uncovered by Judicial Watch, the Speaker's military travel cost the United States Air Force $2,100,744.59 over a 2-year period. And of that number, $101,429.14 was for in-flight expenses, which included food and alcohol, and it lists at least 10 or 12 brands of booze that were purchased, whiskey, vodka, you name it, all this on the flights that Ms. Pelosi was sponsoring. Also, we found that the Judicial Watch previously uncovered internal defense documents indicating that Pelosi had requested military escort aircraft along with her plane being escorted by military fighters as well. Well, when you look at this, you wonder where all of our government money has gone. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk.
Listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.